Welcome to the special podcast series of Bridging the Gap, where emergency managers and industry experts attending the 2024 International Association of Emergency Managers come together to discuss the current and past challenges facing emergency management. Join us as we explore insightful recommendations for improving efficiency in the field through the latest trends, solutions, and expert advice. Tune into the conversation that's shaping the future of emergency management.
Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Bridging the Gap. And with me for this podcast is Dr. Kevin Kupietz, who is the chair of the Department of Aviation and Emergency Management at Elizabeth City State University. Dr. K, as your kids call you or as your students call you, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. This is a great opportunity. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Talk to us, if you don't mind, a little bit about I've seen emergency management departments at different schools that are tied with different aspects, but never with the aviation side of things. And talk to me a little bit about what it is that you do at Elizabeth City State University, please.
Yes, we're really proud of the fact that we have mixed the manned flight education that we do degree along with the unmanned aircraft systems degree that we have and the emergency management degree. And they all fit together really, really closely. So we're doing a lot of use of the drones within the emergency management work. In fact, the 4 students that I have here today with me, they're actually aviation students that are either minoring or focusing on emergency management, which is a little bit different. Normally I bring emergency management students to this type of event. But these students are working a Homeland Security project, and it is drones in public safety. And what they're looking at is, can the drones really do everything that TV says that they can do in order to save the lives, right?
Yeah.
And it's really been kind of an interesting thing. And we've been able to involve, we're at 12 students now that we've had involved in this over the past year at various stages where they get to go out there and experiment and see, what works, what doesn't work, and look for best practices and challenges, which is really pretty cool. And as far as throw me under the bus, my students are usually pretty good with that. But I do have to say that my students are really good. I'm surprised that they didn't jump at the opportunity to talk. The strength of our program, the strength of our small university is our students. And when you meet our students, they're just wonderful.
Oh, they were very engaging, very interested, but they definitely thought that you would be a better representative of the program and what they're doing. Talk to me a little bit about the application. Before the podcast, you were giving us a little bit of a background of the applicability and the real world examples just very recently that you and your students embarked upon.
Yeah, if you just even look at the last Tulane and Milton events that we've had, I deployed myself with the National Disaster Medical System, but we had students that deployed with nonprofit organizations that they're with, such as the Baptist group. We had some of them go out there and they mucked out houses. We have students that work with the Red Cross. In fact, not part of the storm, we actually had 2 power outages, and our community emergency response team, which we're lucky enough, we have one of the largest and strongest, most active CERT programs on college campuses.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so I'm going to throw that challenge out. I know I'm going to probably get some hate mail from other CERT teams. But yeah, our students are really good. And they actually had to go out 11 o'clock at night twice on campus and set up the shelters. And they had done the Red Cross training for that. But then along with that, even the other applications, and I always tell people, you tell me what you like to do as a hobby or what you enjoy doing, and we can find a job for you in emergency management. So it's
a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
Because I think so. We've gotten so rigid in emergency management these days where unless you have this education or this certification or this type of training or anything, you're excluded from the field.
Yeah.
Where when you and I first started, it was kind of all comers in a sense. But so, forgive me for interrupting, but expand on that.
No, you're absolutely right. So, and I still tell everyone I'm 29 years old, which makes my 45-year-old daughter really mad. But when we came in, it was the fire chief retired or the firefighter retired, and that's what I did. Come from fire and paramedic.
Likewise.
And that was the emergency manager. And really now these kids are coming with all these different talents. So we had some of our certified flight instructors, they flew some of the first missions into the western part of North Carolina with supplies. Not that a Cessna 172 carries a lot of weight, but that I forget exactly what they said. They carried 352 pounds or something like that. They had it down, calculated the weight and balance right down to the ounce. That really made a difference. So
it's a huge force multiplier, especially when you're completely shut off.
Yeah.
If you've ever been in that area of North Carolina, it is rural.
Right.
It's tough to access. So, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, so we had students that were able to do that. We've had students that were able to give advice on using the drones and the unmanned aircraft systems. We still have a Starlink system that is up in the mountains working with a wonderful nonprofit group called Vets to Drones that we work really close with. And just being able to be part of that is really good. And I have to say that the university has been really good to me in allowing me to go out to these events with the NDMS system, which is really kind of cool because every once in a while I'll get to actually zoom in from where I'm at and do classes, and the students love that, just to be able to see what's going on.
So zoom in from the standpoint of a virtual platform Zoom.
Oh, yes.
Instead of zooming in with a kid. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, don't zoom in with a plane for class. That would be bad. But use the Zoom platform. So during Hurricane Ian, I was down there in the devastation with 7 mobile hospitals. And so I was able to do class from inside one of the mobile hospitals, not with patients, but from that shelter type of atmosphere where they could see what was going on.
Yeah.
Be able to show them from standing in front of a marina with a dozen huge boats sitting on the ground behind me, that really makes a difference.
It's not just the academic or didactic approach of, death by PowerPoint, lecture. They're seeing in real time, right behind your shoulder, the devastation that is wrought by a natural disaster. And then also the application of what you're trying to teach them right there at that time. That's phenomenal.
And it's
well
really,
done.
And it's really important to do that. I was telling your executive producer before we talked, we were talking about how do we find emergency management students and high school kids. And that's a real challenge right now because the typical high school student and their parents don't understand the viability of a successful career in emergency management. I know Dr. O with Texas Southern University is down out there out of Houston. She runs a wonderful program, and she's having the same problems, recruiting these high school kids in. Yeah. We talk about how do we do this. And I was telling you, producer, most of my students, my majors, they're accidental students. So they're the students that came into my class because it sounded cool or they needed those credits. Yeah. And then they find that they liked it so much that they end up changing their major.
That's cool.
And they find jobs all over the place. That's not necessarily an issue that we're having is finding employment.
That's interesting because that's one of those aspects, and I'm really glad that you're bringing that up because in terms of, unintended again, bridging the gap, we're crowdsourcing, we're looking at some of the older hands in emergency management trying to impart lessons to the younger folks, but then by extension, you've got all of these different emergency management programs that have cropped up over the past several years. And one of the complaints that you hear from a lot of these graduates is it's tough to find a job. Or you find a job with a state entity or a state agency or some municipality, and unfortunately the pay isn't that great. And you can't get a job somewhere else because you don't have the experience. So you go to this state entity, municipality, what have you. You cut your teeth for a couple of years and then you move on. But to hear you say that your students are very successful in terms of placement post baccalaureate, can you talk a little bit about that? I know it's a little different turn.
So I don't want to be misleading about that because what you're saying is absolutely right. If you're trying to get into FEMA and get that GS 13, 14, 15 job, you're not going to make it.
You've got to have experience.
Yeah, you got to have that experience. But we've had students go into private industry and then into related fields, fire, EMS, and things like that. We are dealing with a little bit of a cultural issue where the students are thinking, or their parents, a lot of our students are first-generation students, and so the parents are saying, well, don't just settle for the first job that comes along. You need to be supervising. And I actually, a fellow faculty member and myself had a conversation with a student where she was really upset because she had job offers, but they were not supervisor positions. And it's like, we promise you that is the worst thing that you want to do is going into a supervisory position right out of college. You got to be willing to take that entry-level job position, even if it's not directly related to emergency management at that point. Everything that we do in this world has some degree of emergency management, disaster management. You can work that into it. You work that into it, you do that resume, and then you move from there.
I couldn't agree with you more, Dr. K. And I lecture a lot on emergency management, and I'll look at folks that aren't necessarily predisposed to emergency management. Sometimes it's to local groups, community groups, what have you, and I ask them if they know anything about incident management or ICS, and of course you get the crowd stare. It's crickets in the room, and then I look at I said, how many people are married, and how many of you married couples have kids? I said, you all practice incident management on a regular basis. You've got a liaison officer. You've got an incident commander. You've got a transportation section officer. You've got an entire command staff and general staff and everything else beyond it. And it's span of control and it's scope. And you're doing incident management whether you know it or not on a regular basis. And it's just applying that to an incident or to an event. What are the challenges that you've seen from when you first started to where you are now, not only from the academic perspective, but also from a responder perspective, and coupled with what you were saying in terms of starting at the bottom and working your way up?
I think probably
I know I threw a lot at you there.
There's a lot there, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. I think one of the biggest issues that we still have is getting people to understand what it is that we do in emergency management. We are, as much as I like Tommy Lee Jones in Volcano or whatever, the emergency manager is not the guy out there actually putting the barricades down to stop the volcano flow.
Exactly.
And people have to realize that everything, if COVID didn't teach this to people, I don't know what will, that emergency management and business continuity is a factor that every business, including the mom and pop shop, needs to be thinking about.
100%.
When you look at the number of restaurants that went out of business because they just didn't have a plan on what to do, that is heartbreaking. So as we move forward, the first thing is we got to have that national level. So again, your producer and I had a great conversation before this, and I was saying, we need that Superman, that Batman for emergency management, where the students say, hey, I want to be that person. I want to be the Black Widow. I want to be Superman, Wolverine, whatever. We have to have that out there so people know and understand, and the little kids want to do that. And then we were doing something the other day where we were joking, all my relatives, and my wife has a large family, and so everyone knows the first Christmas that any child in our family has is a fire truck. That's what they're going to get from me. And someone says, has that worked? How many of your relatives, how many of your grandkids, uncles, nieces, how many of them have actually been in the fire service? Like, none. So, I guess we have to...
You plant the seed, though.
Yeah, we planted the seed, but, we've been trying to do that for, 20 years in emergency management, and that seed's not taken root. So we got to figure out a new way. How do we energize? And I challenge anyone. You come and see our students, and they form. Our community emergency response team is just awesome to watch those students go. Mm-hmm. They like sleeping in tents. They act like they enjoy eating MREs, because that's one of the things I make them do. So they have that energy and they have that desire out there.
You're empowering them.
We're empowering them. Yeah. They write IEPs and run the homecoming parade. They're doing all of that stuff.
Really? Good for them.
And to be able to convince people that, hey, this is cool stuff, let's do this, that is the challenge until they actually done it. Now, once they've done it, it is there. From then, that's what they talk about the entire time.
Do you feel that because you and I have a similar response background, your students should also step off, if you will, not just follow the degree path, but also work in the response to public safety sector, wherever it may be, whether it's fire service, law enforcement, EMS, healthcare. You tell me.
Absolutely. You got to widen your vision as to where you're going and what you can do. So we in our classes in our CERT team, so I'm a HAZMAT tech specialist. Teaching WMD before it was popular in the 90s, right? So when the students, when we do stuff like this, I keep telling them, we're not trying to make you an expert, but I do want you to know what it feels like to wear a HAZMAT suit and try to put a screw into a screw hole, because that's what you're asking people to do.
Yeah.
When my provost, which I love her, she's like, we talked about doing rappelling. And so then after that it became the R word, because she's like, no, you can't rappel. And So we never posted that on social media, and she come up to me one day, she said, I know you're rappelling, you might as well go ahead and post it. But so, she's saying that laughing and loving it, but those are the things that, the students need to do, not for proficiency, but so that they know when they send people out there to do those type of tasks, that they can do that. But now that also means that they need to understand social media. That means that they need to be able to figure out the predictive software programs, all of this STEM stuff that you and I were not taught as firefighters and paramedics.
No, not one bit.
And so, and I love my firefighters, but if I give them a computer software and tell them, hey, I need you to process a Pix4D picture, 3-dimensional from what this drone just did, they're going to hand me that flash drive back and say, you need to do this, right?
I don't even know what you just said, so I'm on their team.
But the beauty is we don't have to. What's that saying? You don't want to be this, as a leader, you don't want to be the smartest person in the room. You want the smartest person in the room working for you. And again, that's the thing that we need to be educating these new emergency managers on, is you can't be a master of everything. You got to kind of know and specialize in that one thing and be able to put yourself out there and trust others.
Talk to me a little bit, or expand rather, on what you were just speaking on and how much that new influence is impacting your aviation and emergency management programs.
It's huge. I mean, just walk around the vendor floor here. How many of the vendors are computer, software, tech type of people? If we would have been to this conference 10, 15 years ago, most of them would have been selling personal protective equipment, stickers, all kinds of other stuff. So that's become really, really important. And I think we need to be looking at not only what technologies do we need to have now and how we're incorporating that in there, but where are we moving forward to? So one of the things that we're doing, for example, in our small universities, we're actually looking at some of the cyber stuff. Is it possible for bad guys to take over a good person's drone and do bad things with it? Is it possible for someone to mess with the responders for the aviation field and send false signals to an airline jet? Is it possible to be able to have some kind of jamming device that causes problems with the GPS inside the aircraft? We know we can do it from outside the aircraft. So is it possible that it can get snuck in? So when you start stuff and trying to figure out, where does the student need to go? Wherever our imagination ends is kind of where it's at. I did a class this last year. We developed a public safety and drones class. And in that class, I have to admit that I overworked my students. I put 20 pounds of stuff in a 10-pound class, right? Because that's just, the firefighter way.
Yep.
But we really spent a lot of time looking at things that were going to happen in the future. We spent a lot of time looking at what's happening in Ukraine and Gaza. And when you look at Ukraine and the drones that they're flying over there.
Holy cow. They have completely changed the platform.
Yeah.
Please.
But I was going to say, when you look at them, they are just making these kits that you can buy off of Amazon or Walmart. They're the same kits that our students are building in classes. And basically, they're just duct taping extra battery packs to them. They're literally tie wrapping a mortar shell to the top of the drone. They're using some commercially made drone to visualize where the target is, and then they fly these drones in first person, and these guys are getting so good at it, they can fly it into an open window of a tank or a Jeep or something like that.
Well, it's funny you say that, because going back to what you were talking about in terms of the public safety aspect, in talking to federal law enforcement partners that we work with, there is a big concern because they have seen a proliferation of drones delivering payloads in the prison system.
Yes.
And that is something that is really on a lot of people's unintended radars, because that's yet another thing that law enforcement, correctional institutions and what have you need to account for, which they didn't have to before.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of my point there, is if they can do this in Gaza and Ukraine with very limited resources, anybody here in America can do the same thing with ill intent.
Exactly.
So now we have to do this whole new field of counter UAS. How do we detect these? Right now, according to the rules and regulations, the normal responders can't do anything to the drone because that's an aircraft, it's controlled by FAA.
Yes.
So how do we deal with not only the technology, but now we have to figure out how to deal with the policies and the rules and the regulations. And then you also have the public perception. So, the public perception is if we're out there doing mapping and modeling with our drones, trying to do flood mitigation, we have people come talk to us and ask us why we're taking pictures of them. And
exactly, yeah. And there's the corollary to that is all of the public information.
Yep.
And we were speaking earlier to another guest on the podcast about community engagement and how you need to invest time in engaging the rest of the community so they have a better understanding instead of sitting there with a shotgun trying to shoot it out of the sky.
Yeah, and that's something that's got to happen on a national level. So the things that you and I are talking about are great, but we can't solve them on a local or regional level. We need people to be out there explaining to the high school kids, why the emergency management is a great career. We need people to be changing the perception on the fact that drones are good. Regardless of what the movies show them doing, that's not the normal use for those drones, that there are things out there. And then along with that, even, the public education and the being able to take care of your own self and your own family. And our students do a wonderful job with that with the CERT. They spend a lot of time doing public education. And it surprises me when my students come back and say, look, we went to this neighborhood and we talked to them about go bags and nobody had a go bag. And it's like, well, there you go. That's exactly why you're doing this.
You bring up a good point, and I meant to raise it earlier when we were talking about preparedness and community preparedness, engaging the communities. But preparedness also starts at home.
Yes.
And how many families have any kind of emergency preparedness plan or continuity of operations plan, whatever you want, continuity of family plan, I don't know, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and that's a huge issue. And I got to give accolades to our leadership at our university, Dr. Dixon, our chancellor, and Dr. Ward, our provost, because and by helping us with the CERT team and doing the public education and going out there and talking to them. So we have 152 students in our CERT program right now.
Wow.
Most of them are not going to be emergency managers. No. Most of them are not going to have any field or job that go along with that. Yeah. But now that's 152 students in an historically black college and university, HBCU, that now understand the importance of preparedness. They're going to go out there and they're going to teach their family. Hopefully their family is going to teach a couple people. So, you tell one person, how many people do they tell? Right. And that becomes the big issue. And our students have done such a good job. So, for example, the bomb threats that happened a few years ago to the HBCUs, we were involved in one of those.
Yeah.
And it was kind of, our CERT team was out there. They were helping people, move out of the areas that we thought were in danger and move them to special areas. Mm-hmm. And one of our students, she noticed that some of the students were packing everything they owned and bringing it with them, and some of them didn't even have a coat with them. And so that's where she got on this huge kick. So all of my students have to do a service learning project. And her service learning project was that she was going to teach everybody about go bags. And so in the process of teaching everybody about go bags, Blue Cross Blue Shield was doing some work with us, and they're like, hey, you go ahead and use some of our money that we gave you and create go bags. So the students literally created 1,000 go bags and gave them out to community members at different events.
That's phenomenal. Where can, if people want to find out more about your program and about Elizabeth City State University, how can we find out more about you and what you all are doing, the important work that you're doing?
Well, of course, I always have to tell them to go see our webpage, right?
Of course,
Webpage is what it is. I always tell people, go look at our Facebook. And my students tell me, Dr. K, Facebook's old. You need to be doing Instagram or whatever it is that we're doing now.
But this coming from a guy with no social media, so yeah.
But the cool thing with Facebook is it's our historical repository. Yeah. So if you want to see what we've done over the years, you scroll backwards on that, and you can see all the way to the time that we formed in 2018. You can see the cool things that the kids did. As far as I know, we're the only university that has landed a Marine Corps Osprey on our front yard and practiced taking patients on and off the Osprey.
That's fabulous.
In the event of a disaster. And those are the things that we really, really need to get out there into the public and see. I am so amazed every time I tell people what we do. We have a drone, 16-foot wingspan, vertical takeoff, vertical landing, 10-hour flight time.
Wow.
And I tell people about these things, and they're like, you guys have that in Elizabeth City? You guys only have 2,300 students? Like, yeah, we do. So now I've gotten to the point where I tell everyone, we're the best kept secret on the East Coast. And I'm tired of keeping the secret, right? But emergency management's kind of like that. We are the secret that nobody really understands. They think that we drive around in black Suburbans and we work in this mystical way. And whatever disaster happens, we just automatically fix it.
Yeah.
And again, I would love to be able to change that attitude to what you just talked about with the public education.
Dr. K, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, I want to thank Dr. Kevin Kupietz, the chair of Elizabeth City State University's Aviation and Emergency Department, for joining us today on Bridging the Gap podcast here at the International Association of Emergency Managers, or IAEMs.
Awesome. This has been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. K.